house of horrors in Gwinnett County. That's where police say a family tortured a woman to death.
She was standing on her head halfway, her hands behind her back. There was a belt, she was being whipped. It looks like she's struggling. She's having issues breathing.
Every defendant in this case beat the victim until about day 6.
The mom is now charged with murder, along with 3 of her own children.
He was stripped naked, beaten about his genitals, and then they shot him.
The torture and death of a woman reportedly lured to the U.S. from Asia. The woman's emaciated and burned body was found last week in the trunk of a car.
They say those who know God are those whose hearts are pure, but sometimes false prophets use God's name to manipulate vulnerable people to enact their wicked thoughts through inconceivable actions. This was a lesson South Korean native Sihi Cho learned the hard way, one that not only took her life, but took it in the most inhumane and gruesome way possible. Only 33 years old, she already experienced trauma in her homeland after being sexually assaulted, causing her to fall into a state of depression. This prompted the decision that would ultimately lead to her brutal murder.
The victim in this case had actually been sexually assaulted in Korea and really spiraled into a depression. She came to the United States to sort of restart her life and find God.
In order to escape her past and have a fresh start, she planned to move to the United States to get closer to God with the help of a religious group she was led to believe honored her culture. This choice was at the time coerced by fellow Koreans who knew her mother, but she'd find out their dark motives when it was too late. The religious group called themselves Soldiers of Christ, or SOC for short.
Do we know exactly, Michelle, like how she, if she was lured from South Korea, like how did she end up going from South Korea to this group outside Atlanta?
We believe that her family and the family that was living in this home had some sort of connection. And that's when she hooked up with the people that are now charged in this crime.
Happy for a second chance at life through a spiritually anointed path, Sihi Cho packed her bags and boarded a flight with her mother, arriving in the US on July 21, 2023. She was picked up by 26-year-old Eric Hyun, one of the people at the house where she planned to stay. Eric was given these instructions by a woman named Mi-hee Lee, the mother of 3 of the members of Soldiers of Christ.
Do you know who picked up the victim from the airport?
Eric.
Is that according to the text messages?
Yes. Mi-hee gave him the flight information and their names and instructed him to pick them up from the airport. And then he told Mi-hee once he picked them up and was on the way back.
Cho's mother knew Lee's mother in South Korea and brought her to the Lee family home, trusting them with her daughter's rehabilitation. Sihi Cho breathes in the air with a sigh of relief as she pulls up to the Atlanta house in the 2400 block of Stable Gate in Lawrenceville. The plan was to join the Korean Pentecostal Church, owned by the family accommodating her. Mi-hee Lee and her husband were members of the church, and her husband was also a pastor. So by all accounts, this was the best place to be. However, she soon found out that image of the family was all a ruse to lure her into their real religion, their cult, Soldiers of Christ. This church wasn't in a physical holy building. No. This church was in their basement, and their services weren't singing and a sermon, but torture and inhumane rules that came with harmful punishment if not adhered to.
So the family has an actual church as well, located in Gwinnett. I can't provide you the exact address, an actual physical church, I'm not referring to the one that was in the basement.
They have a church, the family?
Yes, so the father and Mi-hee were, I believe, from my understanding, pastors at this church.
What is the name of the church, if you know?
I know it's a Korean Pentecostal church.
For the purpose of following each suspect and their involvement in the gruesome events to come, we'll clearly associate a name with a face. There are 9 people at the home. The 33-year-old victim, Si-hee Cho, also referred to as Cho. Mr. Lee, who is the husband of Mrs. Mi-hee Lee, also referred to as Mrs. Lee. Mrs. Lee's 3 sons as follows: 26-year-old Junho Lee, referred to as David; 22-year-old Junhyum Lee, referred to as Isaac; 15-year-old Junyong Lee, referred to as Lee Jr., whose photo won't be shown as he's a minor. The remaining members are 26-year-old Gawom Lee, who is a family cousin and referred to as Cousin Lee; 25-year-old Hyunji Lee, who is the girlfriend of David and referred to as Esther; and lastly, 26-year-old family associate Eric Hyun. Thinking her daughter is in good hands, Cho's mother reimburses the Lee family some funds before returning to South Korea. Afterward, she constantly tries contacting her or the family, but all communications stop after they get her daughter exactly where they want.
According to her mother, did he have any money on her when she was in the United States?
No.
According to her mother, did he have a phone on her while she was in the United States?
Yes.
Did the police ask Sehi's mother if Sehi's mother called these individuals?
Yes.
What did she say about it?
She did have communication with them at first, but eventually they stopped answering the phone and she was no longer able to get in contact with anyone.
Did the police ask if Sehi's mother left any resources such as money to this family?
I know she reimbursed them for some cost. I believe the amount was $5,000 US dollars.
Cho, being none the wiser as to their plans, initially agrees to undergo an orientation for which she thought was joining an official church, but she is relinquished of her cell phones and locked in the basement, which is hidden inside the garage behind a separate door, where the grueling orientation to join SOC begins.
In those same text messages, Hyunji actually suggests that David should take away her cell phone, to which he responds he had already done so.
Mrs. Lee instructs Eric to block out the windows and make sure Cho has no contact with anyone outside of the group. It became evident to Cho that she fell into the hands of a demented group of extremist spiritualists, but once they began explaining the rules of the orientation ritual to join SOC, she became certain the family wasn't followers of God, but more so of a twisted self-righteous calling.
They described the recruitment process as daily tasks that had to be completed, along with meetings. They said when the tasks were not completed, there were also additional tasks and punishments. The text messages, it says make sure she doesn't know that certain contractors are coming, or make sure that they don't see her. And we later found pictures where the windows to the garage or the basement are covered with newspaper.
Enduring the first day of tasks and beatings, Cho wants out of the ritual, but she is informed once the initiation process begins, she can no longer quit. Cho's entire life is now in their hands. She is stripped of her name and referred to only as number 5. From how to stand, right down to when she can and cannot eat and use the restroom, she was at their mercy. Slowly, she is being broken down, her mind and body are deteriorating, but the beatings and strenuous tasks keep piling on.
The juvenile told me that every defendant in this case hit the deceased victim. He said that they took the victim's cell phone and controlled when the victim could eat and drink. He said they also regulated when the victim could use the restroom. The victim could only use an actual restroom twice a day, otherwise had to use the grass if she needed to use the restroom. The juvenile said that the expectations of the group are to do the things that the Lord directs them to do. And he said that they would not have let the victim leave if she wanted to. The juvenile said that by his assessment, the victim wanted to quit as early as during the orientation day, and said in direct quote, "There is no quitting this program."
No matter how much she expresses she wants to leave, she is kept in the inhumane initiation process. Mrs. Lee goes as far as instructing Eric to refuse her right to food and places her on fasting periods before allowing her any kind of sustenance.
Do you have any, through your investigation, do you have information that she was prohibited from eating?
I only have the text messages between Eric and Mihi, where Mihi is instructing Eric to tell her that she was going to start another fast and to begin limiting water.
For the next 6 days, Cho is drilled, tortured, and beaten by all the members of SOC. That wasn't even the worst of her torture. Evidence later collected shows the heartbreaking video that detailed Cho's condition on day 5 of the initiation process. According to Detective Angela Carter of the Gwinnett County Police Homicide Unit, Cho was forced into a tub of freezing cold ice water for 5-minute intervals. But not only that, her head was at times forcefully held under the freezing water until she was within an inch of her life.
Could you please describe the ice water video to the judge?
It was a lot larger than the cooler. It was big enough for a human body to fit into. Again, filled with ice water. Sihi is not deceased as of yet, but it looks like she's struggling. She's having issues breathing. Her eyes, in my opinion, she appears to almost be dead. She looks very, very weak. And it doesn't appear like she can get out of the water. Looks like she's trying to move a little bit, but can't.
Mr. Galwan said that he had been a member of the group for 2 months. He said that he made her dunk herself in an ice box for approximately 5 minutes at a time. He said that he would intermittently push the victim's head all the way into the water of the ice box during that 5-minute time frame. He said that the victim, that this began on day 5 of the process.
Cho is slowly and painfully being tortured to death, but none of the members of SOC seem to care. They believe they are getting their directives from the voice of God and that Cho is possessed by a demon.
We learned a whole lot about how the so-called soldiers of Christ operated. One of the members told police that they all get direct instructions from God.
He said that they all receive direct communication from God, but that David and Mihi Lee received the most instructions from the Lord.
Junho believed Sihi was possessed by a demon. He said she was evil, I guess.
This gruesome treatment continues for a couple more days before Cho realizes it's now or never. She must escape, or her life will end. Summoning the last of her strength, she forces her way out of the basement with just her underwear on, and runs upstairs, where she comes into contact with the husband, Mr. Lee. It was a ray of hope in what appeared to be hell. She pleads with him to let her go, saying she wants to stop the ritual. Isaac rushes up to try and restrain her, which results in a fight between Isaac and his father, Mr. Lee. It appears Mr. Lee had a difference of opinion after seeing the dilapidated state Cho is in. Obtained text messages between David and his girlfriend Esther later exposed that somehow, maybe through Mr. Lee's intervention, Cho was able to call someone who detectives label as Mr. Park, telling him she was falsely imprisoned.
She had escaped upstairs and ran upstairs in her underwear and spoke to their father that lived in the home and said that she wanted to leave, she wanted to stop. This incident then caused a physical altercation with the father and Isaac, and the father then said to stop the process immediately. And they then discussed Sihi contacting somebody, I believe the name was Mr. Park, saying that she was being held against her will. She actually, to my understanding, used the Korean term for false imprisonment. She was being false imprisoned and was going to call the police and provided the address that she was at.
That, unfortunately, was a fight-or-flight decision that would cost Cho gravely. Remember, breaking the rules comes with punishment, and Cho not only tried to escape, but gave out the location to an outsider. At the instruction of Mrs. Lee, Cho is taken back to the basement where now punishment comes in the form of escalated torture. The door closes, and Si-hee Cho is now faced with the daunting reality before her. Approximately 2 months pass, and September 12th arrives. Eric drives to a Korean spa near Pleasant Hill Road and Interstate 85, where he parks a silver Jaguar sedan. He is then picked up in a separate vehicle by who reports labeled as his father, who takes him to the hospital for injuries he sustained. Eric is so badly injured that it takes him approximately 20 minutes to exit his vehicle. Footage shows his father having to help him, as he appears to barely be able to walk. The reason why would be found out later, and it's sick, to say the least. His car is left in the parking lot for the entirety of the day, but his father returns after 10 p.m. to collect Eric's computer. That's when he makes a shocking discovery. There is a deceased body wrapped in plastic in the trunk of the vehicle.
They met with the complainant, who was later identified to be the father of another defendant in this case, Eric Kuhn. He stated that earlier that day, his son Eric contacted him and said that he needed to meet him there because he had been injured and needed to go to the hospital. The complainant, Eric's father, met him there. He said it took him approximately 20 minutes to get out of the vehicle. Eric took approximately 20 minutes to get out of the vehicle because of his injuries. He then transported him to a hospital, to Emory Hospital, where he was later transported to Grady Hospital for his injuries. The father stated he was asked by his wife, who I believe who spoke with Eric via telephone, and asked if he had picked up Eric's computer when he took him to the hospital prior to them leaving the area. The complainant said he did not, so he returned to the vehicle later that night to check on it and to get the computer. He said during that time, since he was going to leave the vehicle there unattended, he wanted to make sure there was nothing else valuable in the vehicle. And that's when he looked into the trunk and located what he believed to be a body wrapped in a blanket.
Surveillance footage obtained from the spa corroborates these timelines of occurrences. Police soon swarm the crime scene, inspecting the victim lifeless in the trunk. A detective goes to the hospital to interview a wounded Eric, and that's when an even darker understanding of their torturous ritual begins taking shape. His body bore the scars of what seemed like experiments, pushing the human limits to their breaking point.
While that was occurring, Detective Randy Blackburn went to the hospital to speak with Eric. Eric had multiple injuries to him. Those injuries were documented by photographs by Detective Blackburn. When asked what had occurred earlier that day and what caused his injuries, Eric explained an explosion occurring. He said they had placed multiple products into a paint can along with pellets, and an explosion occurred.
So the injuries were burns?
There were also multiple circular, I don't want to say puncture wounds, but circular injuries inside of him, like into his body.
When questioned about the deceased body in his trunk, clear contradictions begin emerging in the varying stories he tries to weave.
When questioned about the deceased body in the trunk, Eric provided multiple inconsistent statements, one being that the individual was still alive when she got into the trunk, and she got in there by herself due to his car having a lot of items in it, since there was no room. He then said that she was really sick and he was going to make her better.
While all this is happening, a neighbor notices something ominously peculiar occurring back at the Lee residence.
Adam says he did see them out this past Tuesday night, the night the car was discovered, standing in a circle in the street.
It was weird because it was very intimate. You could see they were like in really close.
The vehicle is removed from the scene, and transported to the medical examiner's office to be processed after a warrant is received. This leads to the discovery that the body was that of South Korean native Si-hee Cho. Not only was she deceased, but her body was also burnt. The hardest thing to stomach with these results is that given the level of torture and explosions, the burns likely occurred while she was still alive.
There was documentation located in the vehicle inside of a suitcase with female items. We were able also to get a license with that name. The medical examiner during the autopsy collected a fingerprint, and that was sent to the Korean consulate, who was able to confirm her identity.
Running the number plates for Eric's vehicle leads authorities to the Lee home, where they take David in for questioning based on Eric's statements. David denies any allegations and instead tries to paint Eric as being mentally ill. The walls to their sick, hidden lifestyle were beginning to crumble.
He said that he had lived with them for a while, that he was not familiar with any explosion, and denied assisting him with cleaning anything up. And he said that Eric was not right in the mind.
According to David, he had no idea Cho was even still in the country. Throwing Eric under the bus once more, he tells detectives Eric drove both Cho and her mother to the airport to return to South Korea.
He was not familiar with a decomposing body. He said he believed Si-hee had returned to Korea. He said that Eric drove her and her mother to the airport.
Detectives realized something was off and had to work fast before any evidence was disposed of. A search warrant is obtained for the home, but upon arrival, Lee Jr. is taking out a trash can. Luckily, they arrive just in time because upon inspecting the trash can, critical evidence is found.
When we arrived, there was the juvenile was taking a trash can to the street, and we also observed the trash truck coming around collecting items.
Did the police go through the trash?
We did.
What did they see?
Cardboard. There was a cardboard box that had a large amount of what appeared to be blood on it. CSI on scene tested it, did a preliminary test to see if it was human blood, and it tested. It did indicate that it was human blood. There was sandpaper blocks, multiple tissues that appeared to have bodily fluid on them. I don't believe a preliminary test was done on those. They did have a significant odor to them. A sanding block, duct tape, hair, multiple white pellets, like used in like BB guns or airsoft guns. Those were also located throughout the basement, as well as a pair of pajama pants that had a strong odor to them and had the same pattern on it as that the victim was wearing at the time she was located. They also threw away and attempted to dispose of items that had blood on it, the pants that Si-hee was wearing at the time of her death, multiple other items as well in that trash can.
Going into the house, everyone is detained while they conduct a search. What they found indicated something was cleaned up before their arrival. Decomposing flesh is putrid in the air beneath the lingering scent of bleach and Febreze. Uniforms with the cult crest are also located along with blood droplets, firearms, and more evidence painting the home as one involved in illegal and murderous activity.
During the search warrant, in the basement, we located multiple blood droplets throughout the basement. We also heard loud, it was a loud song that I later learned was a popular Korean worship song. It was playing on repeat. There was a strong odor of bleach and Febreze throughout the basement, and the floor was wet, like it had recently been covered with bleach, and a chair in the back storage closet with multiple punctures that was also wet. That smell later, the bleach and Febreze smell in the back room mainly later faded, and we were able to then start smelling, or I was able to smell decomposition.
And by decomposition, do you mean decomposition of a dead human body?
Yes. There were jackets located that had the symbol SOC. There was a similar clothing items in the basement that also had that the same emblem SOC on it.
Were there any firearms located in the home?
Multiple.
In the basement, a bloody area is assumed to be where Cho was slowly tortured to death. Beside it is a chair filled with holes, possibly where the experimental explosion punctured. There's no telling what pain and injuries such an act inflicted on Cho. Everyone is questioned at the scene, and the mother, Mrs. Lee, told detectives the same story as David, stating that Si-hee Cho went back to South Korea with her mum. 6 suspects were taken to the police station for further questioning, excluding the mother and her husband.
During the initial investigation on scene, she told us multiple times that Si-hee had returned to Korea and she had no knowledge of her still being in the United States, or anything to do with the process of joining Soldiers of Christ.
Once in the interview room, the truth began leaking out in their statements. Ultimately, detectives learn of Cho's trip to the US and her torture and death, which they confessed happened in August. Analyzing devices confiscated in the search, the gruesome and heartbreaking scenes of her torture and death were enough to make anyone choke up with emotion.
Every defendant in this case beat the victim until about day 6 of her training process.
There was a video of her kind of leaning on the ground with just her head touching the ground. She was standing on her head halfway, her hands behind her back, and she was being, there was a belt, she was being whipped with what appeared to be a belt. There was a video of her doing multiple jumping jacks, and in that video she appeared to be weak. She looked like she was struggling. There was another video of her walking towards a cooler full of ice water and getting into it, and again she appeared weak at that time. There was also a photo located of Si-hee deceased in the back storage room, and you were able to tell she was deceased based on, because you could see her hands were had already started decomposing, as well as her feet. And in that photo she was wearing the pajama pants that were later recovered from the trash can, or were recovered from the trash can during the search warrant.
It was later discovered through text messages and interviews David instructed Eric to look after Cho's deceased body and bring her back to life, stating that the devil living inside her was the cause of her decomposing odor. It was becoming clear this was no spiritual group, but one with delusions of evil.
At one point, the state says someone instructed Hyun to, quote, take care of the smell being caused by the devil inside the victim, and that it was his job to revive her.
An autopsy by the medical examiner revealed that Cho's malnourished body weighed only 70 pounds and the contents in her stomach were mostly liquid, meaning that she not only endured torture, but prolonged starvation as her life painfully slipped away.
Apparently the victim was subjected to beatings, malnourishment, which subsequently resulted in what the medical examiner's office believes the cause of her death.
Investigators say the woman, thought to be in her 20s or 30s, was from South Korea. They say her body weighed just 70 pounds when it was found.
With the surmounting evidence against them, all 6 suspects were detained and charged with multiple felonies. Mrs. Lee would later be arrested with the same charges, in addition to making false statements after text conversations and testimonies from her youngest son linked her as one of the main members receiving alleged orders from God and delegating to the other members of SOC. Who would have thought the mother could be the mastermind?
The woman charged today was the 7th charged in the death of a recent South Korean immigrant named Si-hee Cho. Before today, these 5 adults had been charged with murder, plus a juvenile not shown here. Police say they were part of a religious cult that called itself the Soldiers of Christ, operating out of a suburban tract home with a Lawrenceville address. Now the home's principal resident, Mi-hee Lee, is also charged with murder. Police say she is the mother of 3 of the suspects taken in this morning, 8 days after a warrant was issued for her arrest.
To my knowledge, she was arrested in Marietta with the help of the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Office Fugitive Unit.
As if the crime wasn't already sick in nature, court trials revealed even more haunting revelations. In a shocking twist, Eric claimed he was also a victim of SOC. Coming into the courtroom with crutches, barely able to walk, his lawyer exposed that video evidence shows Eric was also in the basement with Cho being tortured through the same initiation process, and the details are almost unbelievable. So much so, it was enough for a judge to grant Eric a bond of $100,000 against prosecutors pushing against it.
This afternoon, Eric Young's attorney argued he's a victim in this case, not a suspect who belongs in jail. His attorney detailed the horrors he and another woman went through before a judge granted Hyun a $100,000 bond. In Gwinnett County, prosecutors don't deny the horrors Eric Hyun survived.
Unequivocally, the defendant was assaulted by the co-defendants to a level unimaginable.
An attorney for Hyun says he can barely walk after being physically tortured by the Lees. He says Hyun was shot with an airsoft gun hundreds of times and beaten with a belt until he was knocked unconscious.
He had been deprived food. He had been malnourished.
Despite Hyun's injuries, the state argued he was one of the most trusted and loyal soldiers of the cult. They said he asked a funeral home how they handle the dead and looked up how to maintain the temperature of a body. Prosecutors want him held responsible for the death of a malnourished woman found in the trunk of a car outside a popular spa in Duluth.
Was willing to obey their orders and handle and take care of a dead body for weeks.
His attorney also claims Young was a victim financially and that other members of the group maxed out his cards and used his credit to purchase a home for their church.
Hyun is a victim in this case. He was also kept in that basement with Miss Cho, the deceased. He was down there for many weeks, also denied food, and he was beaten very badly with a whip. He was stripped naked, beaten about his genitals, and then they shot him with an airsoft gun in his arms and his back.
Another dilemma demanded the attention of authorities. Turns out, just like Cho, Eric was also given a number. She was called number 5, and Eric was called number 4 by SOC, which suggests that there are 3 other victims who either completed the initiation, or worse, died and disposed of.
Hyun's attorney said he was referred to as number 4. The woman who died was number 5. He worries there could be others.
I suspect that those numbers may involve that there's 3 other victims in the case who haven't been identified.
This became even more of a reality when they recovered evidence detailing their meeting with a female college student to recruit her into the organization.
Any other attempts, allegedly, to recruit others into Soldiers of Christ?
Yes, there was a female student whose identity we don't know at this time, who was a current student at Georgia State and aspired to transfer to Georgia Tech. Junho actually met with her one time and had discussed a meeting with her again to recruit her into Soldiers of Christ.
Additional gang charges soon followed the group. Corporal Michael Ricks of the Gwinnett County Police Gang Unit detailed the military connection of the group that warrants the charge. Evidence of uniformed attire along with their organization, crest, and things like matching shoes and gang hierarchy painted the group not only as a cult, but a ruthless gang expanding their territory through their inhumane recruitment process.
Based on all of those interviews, I was able to conclude all of those interviews as well as photographs from the search warrant. I was able to conclude that this was, in fact, a group of 3 or more persons associated. In fact, they had a common patch. They had a common name. They had a leadership, somewhat of a leadership structure, as far as David being the leader of the selection process and Isaac leading the entire group. They had rules that they had to follow and that they had to listen to the instructions that they believed were being passed down from God, and that they are a continuing to commit criminal offenses, and that they had done these same somewhat torturous activities to multiple other people to initiate them into the group. So this is a group that frequently commits this type of torture in order to grow their organization. They maintain their status in this organization by doing what's expected of them, and that they listen to what they believe is God's word. The group benefits by adding new members to the group and increasing their manpower when they do it.
Hopefully, the data collected from their devices leads authorities to anyone associated with the group who's still active, and any additional victims are located safely. As for the current 7 suspects apprehended for Sihi Cho's brutal murder, may justice be rightfully served. Rest in peace, Sihi Cho. For more true crime documentaries, check out one of the videos on the screen. This has been an episode of Mysteries, where true stories from around the world come to life. What stories come next? Like, share, comment, and subscribe to never miss what intriguing chronicles will be told.